Hey everyone, it's Jenny at JC Cards, and today's video is part of a video hop celebrating the latest release from Catherine Pooler. It's the Storybook collection. The next stop in the hop is in the description below, along with all the supplies I used. Today I'm showing you 3 ways to use sentiments as focal points on your cards, and I'm using this gorgeous Take Courage stamp set. I just love it, and a lot of the stamp sets in this collection feature some amazing sentiments, and I really wanted to use them as the focal points on my cards today. So for this first card, this is going to be super clean and simple. I'm using the main image from the Take Courage stamp set, and I'm inking it up with one of the new inks from the release. This is Sage, and I'm doing some secondary stamping here. I want the image to sort of be in the background and set back from the sentiment itself. So I'm first off stamping it off on a scrap piece of cardstock. I'm then stamping it again without re-inking onto a panel of Catherine Pooler premium white cardstock, and you'll see that it's a much fainter image. And be sure to dry this before you move on to the next step. Now this stamp set is also in the new release. It's the Never Forget Fern, and this is the main focal sentiment. I absolutely love it. All the sentiments in these sets are so beautiful and just really thoughtful sentiments. I'm adding it into the center of my panel directly over that focal image, and then I'm treating the panel with a powder tool before inking it up with some Wow embossing ink. I'm then going to heat emboss this with some embossing glitter, and I know a few of you are kind of wary about using embossing glitter for embossing. Sometimes it can flake off, you don't get as clear an impression as you'd like, sometimes it can burn quite easily using a heat gun. So I'm going to show you how you can avoid all of that with this technique. So this is some embossing glitter from one of the new trios by Catherine Pooler and Wow, and I'm adding it directly over the top. And then this is the first tip for using embossing glitter: heat it from behind. You won't blow off any of the glitter, and it will melt the clear embossing powder that holds that glitter. Now add it back into your MISTI. This is really important to use a MISTI or a stamp positioning tool for this technique. And then I'm going to ink it up again in embossing ink, stamp directly over the top. And then here's the trick: add a coating of clear embossing powder. I'm using the Clear Gloss Superfine because this sentiment is quite fine. You could also use regular or matte, and this works for images as well as sentiments. And then heat it up, and I'm going to do this 2 or even 3 times. So you'll see here I'm inking it up again. You don't need to use your powder tool again. Clear embossing powder, you can't see it if it goes anywhere, it shouldn't. And then I'm just going to add that powder over again. And what you'll find is you get a really gorgeous raised image. It traps the glitter so it won't flake off. And it also magnifies the flecks of glitter. So in real life it's absolutely stunning. I'm trying to give you a close-up here so you can just see that image. And I'm going to leave the card just like that. Attached it to a white note card, and that finishes my first card. Now for second card, I'm using a MISTI again. That is really important for this technique, and I'm placing this large sentiment, this is from the Take Courage stamp set, directly into the center of the panel. This is again premium white by Catherine Pooler, and I'm creating a landscape card here. And I'm going to ink it up in another one of the new inks. This is Queen for a Day. These are all spar inks, which mean they have a slightly greyish tone. They're a little muted, and they are my favourite inks by Catherine Pooler. I just love that muted tone. And I'm going to stamp that directly into the centre of the panel. I'll then remove that panel and put in another panel exactly the same size, and I'm not going to shift my stamp. So in the same way that we did for the first card, we don't take the stamp off the MISTI before we finished all of our inking. I will clean off the stamp first though, because I'm going to be using a different colour. This is Pixie Dust. This is a lighter purple and from an earlier release by Catherine Pooler. And I'm inking it up again, and I'm going to stamp it directly into the centre of the panel in the same way that we did before. We're going to do a little bit of die cutting. So I'm going to take the coordinating die that goes with the focal image from the Take Courage stamp set, and I'm placing it directly over the Pixie Dust panel in the centre. I've offset it slightly at the bottom because this is a landscape card, and you'll see that you get a hole in the centre of the sentiment. You can pop it over the darker one if you line it up properly, maybe using a bit of foam tape to add some dimension. What I'm going to do is take the actual die cut itself, and I'm adding it into my MISTI because I'm going to add the image over the top of it. I've added a little bit of dry adhesive at the back just so it stays in place, and then I'm using the Twilight ink, which is a very light grey ink by Catherine Pooler. But it's not light enough. I want that sentiment to stand out. So I'm going to repeat what we did for the first card, which was to stamp off the image first. I'm using a panel of scrap paper here, and then stamp it again without re-inking. And what you'll see is not only is it perfectly lined up, it's very faint. You can just see that image, but it doesn't detract from the sentiment itself. I've die cut the image again from some pink, well it's purple fun foam, which is sticky backed, and then I'm adding some glue. This is the Art Glitter glue, which dries clear. It's my favourite glue, and I'm adding the die cut over the top. I'll add an acrylic block and leave it for a little bit just to adhere. And then the slightly tricky part is lining this up directly over the sentiment, which I have backed onto a note card. It takes, I don't know, 30 seconds or so. And then what I'll do is trim off the excess at the bottom. And you'll see that it's kind of a trick of the eye. When you look over the top, the sentiment lines up perfectly, except it changes colour in the exact same shape as that die cut. And when you look at it from the side, it's stepped up, so it's 3D, and it is one of the things I really like to do. I've done it on a few other cards. I'll show you one here. This one I created a watercolour panel using the Queen for a Day ink again, and this time I used one of the other stamps from the release, and this is heat embossed in white onto the watercoloured panel, and then I stamped the image directly over the top and die cut it out and then popped it up on the craft foam. As a finishing touch, I'm adding some Fairy Wings Nuvo Dream Drops, and that completes the second card. Now for my third and final card, I'm going to create a watercolour panel first, and I'm using this huge acrylic block by Catherine Pooler and smushing down the other two new inks from the release. This is Rouge. It's again a red, but it's got a nice grey tone in it, and Lemongrass. It's kind of a bright yellowy greenish colour. It's hard to describe it. It's really nice, and again they're both spar inks. And I've got a panel here. This is actually Bristol Smooth. I'd recommend for this technique some smooth watercolour cardstock. So Bristol Smooth takes water pretty well, as does Hot Press watercolour cardstock. And I'm going to be using these inks as watercolours. I've taped my panel to a chopping board using some masking tape, so that way it'll dry flat. And I've added lots of water in sweeping stripes using a flat brush. This is a silver brush here. And then I'm using a bit more water in my brush and painting the rouge in stripes down to about 2/3 of the way down the panel. I'm then cleaning off my brush and coming in with the lemongrass and overlapping the two in the centre. I would recommend cleaning off the edges as you go. What I'm trying to get here is a graduated blend, and in a couple of places there was some pooling, so I just sopped those up with a paper towel and then heat dried it. I'm now going to come in with a second layer. I'm using slightly less water, and I'm going back over the top again with Rouge, and then I'll be coming in again with the lemongrass, but this time I'll be starting from the center and working my way down. And you'll see where they blend together, you get this gorgeous muted orange tone in the center, and it's absolutely beautiful. And for this second layer, I actually did leave it to dry naturally. I wanted the paint to blend together naturally without me pushing it with my heat tool, and just left it to dry. Now, it doesn't take very long to dry when you're using smooth cardstock like this. This is it after it has dried. Just be careful and make sure when you touch it, it's not super cold or still damp. You want this to be completely dry before you do the next technique. So I'm going to be adding a number of the sentiments from the Take Courage stamp set all over the back of the panel, and I want them to sort of blend into that panel but still be legible. So I've chosen 3 inks here. I'm using Tiara, which is a really dark yellow / almost orange, Mandarin Spice and Rockin Red, and the reason I chose these is they were about the same colour as the background, but they'd show up, so they're a little bit darker than the colours I'd used when they were blended with water. And I'm taking each of these stamps, I've just picked them at random from the stamp sets. You can do this for any type of stamp, and just pop them all over at random on the back of the panel. I even picked one here that I didn't want the first word, so I just snipped it off, and you can always put it back together again when you're done. Now here's a version of the card that I created previously using the same colours of ink, but the Never Forget Your Own Worth stamp from the Never Forget Fern. This time I'm going to be using that focal image again from the Take Courage stamp set. I've added powder all over the back of the panel, and then I'm stamping in embossing ink the focal image into the centre. I'm then going to be heat embossing in Opaque Vanilla White by Wow, which is a slightly kind of yellow toned white. It's just sort of off-white, like magnolia almost. And I'm adding the embossing powder all over the image. You'll see in a couple of places the stamp sentiments weren't quite dry, so I'm just using a tiny paintbrush just to remove those. It's dry. And then I'm heating it with my heat tool. And as a finishing sentiment, so for my focal sentiment, I'm going to be using this die. It's the Have Courage die from the new release, and I've die cut it from some sand dunes. It's like craft cardstock by Catherine Pooler, and popped it out with my pokey tool. I'm then going to use liquid glue and adhere it to the centre. I actually die cut this in the end 3 times and stacked them all on top of each other. And as a finishing touch, I've got this Nuvo Shimmer Aqua pen. This is the Midas Touch. It's very bright gold, and I like to squeeze a little bit out and then flick it all over the background panel. So you'll see I just flick it on here, and then when it dries it looks like you use gold paint. It's actually really opaque and fantastic for this technique. And that finishes my final card. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd love it if you consider subscribing to my channel, and here's a couple of other videos you may enjoy. Have an awesome day. Bye!